right, ladies and gentlemen, would you please fasten your seatbelts? Put your tray tables in the upright position. We're going to be going through some turbulent territory here this afternoon. I want to talk to you today about power. The dictionary has about 12 different definitions of the word power, everything from an algebraic expression to mechanical forces. But the kind of power I want to talk to you about today is not in the realm of physics or mathematics. It's in the area of human affairs and social conduct. It's the power to alter governments, and it's the power to create the kind of a world in which our children and their children are going to live. Real power. It was 1877 that a French author and playwright by the name of Victor Hugo wrote a book called History of a Crime. It was published into many languages, including English. Very few people have read the book, but almost everyone has heard the English translation of one sentence taken from that book, and that is this one. Greater than the force of mighty armies is the power of an idea whose time has come. And that's the kind of a power that I want to discuss with you today. The purpose of my presentation is to advocate an idea that if pursued with enough energy and diligence by a sufficient number of people, is so powerful that the forces of totalitarianism with all of their agencies of coercion cannot stand against it. I have misgivings about this presentation because it really is designed to be the concluding part of a 5-part series, or maybe even a 6-part. Now that I've been working on this Quigley formula, that might even be a 6th part. I don't know. But in any event, this is supposed to be the end of that series. So the danger is that I'll be talking about solutions to a problem, and we haven't yet really talked about or agreed upon what the problem is. And as you know, if you don't agree as to what the problem is, it's most likely we're not going to agree as to what the solution is. It's like walking into a play. We walk into the final act of the play, and here all the conflict is being resolved, the drama is working itself out, and we have no idea what went on before. It doesn't make sense. So that's the danger I face with this, and that's why I have misgivings. So I need to at least give you a quick overview of the problems as I see it, so that you'll understand where I'm coming from when I talk about solutions. As I see it, the problem of society breaks down into 3 categories. One is the growth of government and the loss of freedom. Now that's a very quick summary of a very large subject. You can just imagine what could be discussed in that category of the growth of government and the loss of freedom. You can just imagine in your mind's eye a chart that starts at this end with very low government and big government over here, and the chart goes like this. And a similar chart that shows freedom up here and slavery down here, and the chart is going like this. And you put those 2 charts together and you can track it over the past 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and it's in almost a straight line, if not accelerating in the direction that we don't want to see it go. And without knowing any of the details, you can just look at the chart in your mind's eye, and you can see that if it continues in that direction, we are headed toward totalitarianism. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure it out. We have the growth of government, more and more laws every day that we breathe. There are laws supposedly to protect us against terrorism or pornography or drugs or crime or some such, always for our own good, isn't it? They're going to protect us, these people, whether we like it or not. And the truth is, many people do like it. That's how they get away with it. They sell it as a means of, for your good, we're going to have these laws. And so, with each passing day, we have more and more and more laws until finally, even now, we're beginning to see that we are living in a system which is got very little room for human freedom anymore, all in the name of protecting us against something. The second area of concern that I have is the corruption in government and hidden agendas. And this usually comes hand in hand with the first one. I mean, where you have so many laws supposedly to protect you from something or other, that gives power to the politicians. And when politicians have great power, there's a temptation to abuse that power. And so we have hidden agendas and profiteering and dishonesty, corruption at the deepest level. We could talk for days on that, and I'm sure each of you in your own mind are thinking of examples of corruption in government. And the third area that I see as a great problem is apathy among the people. There seems to be no indignation out there, no great will to resist, this sort of a passivity. Well, it's not going too good, is it? I wonder what's going to happen next. You know, as though they weren't really involved in this, like they're reading about it in the history book or something. And that annoys me a tremendous amount. In fact, speaking on the topic of apathy, I think I'll give you my 3-minute seminar on apathy. I remember when I was very early in this enlightenment of what's going on in the world, back in the 60s, I began to pick up on it. I began to go around to people and I wanted to tell them everything I knew, that I just read about this, I heard about this, and although I didn't grab them by the lapels and shake them, I was close to it, you know. My wife says I was doing that. I wanted everybody to know, and so I was telling everybody what the problem was here and the problem there, and these people would get this glazed look in their eye, you know, and start looking off in the distance, and I thought, what's the matter with these people? They're so apathetic. Don't they know that this affects them and so forth? And I couldn't understand how there could be so much apathy. And then I realized, fortunately, fairly early on, that the problem was not them, it was me. And the reason I say that is I realized that if you and I were in a rubber raft, and we're out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean someplace, and all of a sudden we look over the edge and we see little bubbles coming up over the edge of the raft, and we think, uh-oh, there's a leak in this raft. And we can see the raft is getting a little smaller and smaller and beginning to sag, and we're getting lower and lower in the water, and the bubbles just keep coming. What do? Well, we look at the bubbles and we think, oh, this is not good news. And we just lie there and sink. We are the picture of apathy. Why? Because there's nothing we can do. But, now change the picture. Suppose the same situation exists and we look around the raft and there's an air pump and a place to screw it in and something we can do. Now we're different. We've got that air pump going. We are Mr. and Mrs. Activism. And the only difference between those two pictures is that in the second case, there was something that could be done. Something, at least, that could be done. And I realized then that I had done such a good job of convincing my listeners that things were so bad that there was nothing could be done. It was too late. And I created the apathy myself. Think about that. We do this. I still do it once in a while, but I try not to. From that point forward, I've always said to myself, there's got to be, when we talk about situations like this, there's got to be some view of a solution. Otherwise, what are you wasting your time for? Easier said than done, though. Easier said, let's have a solution, than to have a real solution. To find a solution, a real one, I think we must first know what will not work. Because otherwise, we could spend a lot of time and energy running down dead ends, wasting valuable time when we could be doing something constructive, but doing instead something that just makes us feel good. And to cover this, I think an analogy would be the best way to examine these different options. Sometimes I think we can see things more clearly in analogies than in real life, because in real life we're involved. We're committed. I mean, we're in the picture. But an analogy, well, that's That's something over there, and we can look at it more objectively. So let's create an analogy. Let's imagine that we're on a ship, a cruise ship. It's a wonderful ship. It's the USS Pleasure Craft. You can't imagine anything being better than that. I mean, the food is good, the music is good, the beverages are flowing up on the casino deck, the slot machines are loose, I mean, in the balmy air, and at night the stars are out, and there's romance in the air. I mean, it's just a wonderful trip, and it's great to be on board. Let's imagine that you and I are strolling on the upper deck one evening, and we go up there where the control room is, the wheel room, and we look in, and we see a horrifying thing. We see a group of men. They're actually pirates. They're not dressed as pirates, but they don't have those hats on or sabers, but they're pirates. They break in, they grab the captain, and they shoot him and throw his body over the edge, and they put the other officers into chains behind their backs. They take their uniforms off, and the pirates put the uniforms on. And we see that. And we're horrified. And we hear what they say. They say, all right, we've now got control of the ship. Now the next move is we're going to turn this ship around, and we're taking it to a prison island, and we're going to download all of these capitalistic, affluent, sloppy, unworthy passengers and show them what life is really like. We're going to put them to work in a collectivist society where they have to earn their bread. And everything will be equal. We're going to a prison island, and we're just dumbfounded with this information. So, what do? We rush downstairs, and the first thing, we break into the lounge, and we say, hey, everybody, you know what we just saw up there? We saw some pirates, and they took the captain, and they shot him in the head, and they're going to take us to a prison island. And everybody's looking at us like we're nuts. What is he talking about? Captain shot, thrown over the prison island? Pirates? What? Come on, call a psychiatrist, somebody, please. Look, there's an officer. We just see him. We just saw him. He walked by. He's got his uniform on. The ship is still going. The band is still playing. Food is still good. Slot machines are still paying off. Everything is the same. Who wants to listen to us? Well, we just learned a big lesson there that nobody wants to believe us, even though it's true. And now the question I pose to you is, what are we going to do? We don't want to go to that prison island. And we know that's where it's headed. What are we going to do? Okay, that's the analogy. Not too far removed from reality, by the way. So let's take a look at the options. There are a lot of them, but I figured out that there were at least 7 good ones, or obvious ones anyway. Here's the first one. Very popular choice. Do nothing. Now, this is based on fear, of course. We're afraid of reprisals. We saw what they did to the captain and to those officers. These guys are rough. They're mean. And a guy could get hurt. You know? You don't want to mess with those guys. They're tough. And so we sure hope somebody else will solve this problem, but not me. I'm staying out of this. I'm just going to watch and see what happens. So we do nothing. That's an option. Note, however, it doesn't solve the problem, does it? And we're looking for solutions. So let's skip to number 2. Well, let's join the pirates. I mean, these guys are in control, aren't they? They're not going to the prison island, or at least if they do, there'll be guards. I'd rather be a guard than be an inmate. So let's go to the pirates and say, you know, you guys are doing a good job. Do you need some help? Get a good job with the forces that are taking us to slavery. Get employed. Become part of them. A lot of people take that option. But again, it's not a solution. It doesn't solve things for our kids and our grandkids and their kids. Not even for us, really, because most of us couldn't survive when we got to that prison island and we saw how really bad it was. We would object, and the first thing you know, we'd be on the other side of the barbed wire as well. Doesn't work. It's not a solution, though. So let's move to number 3. Now, here's a good one. let's jump ship. Let's get off of this ship. This is a bad place to be. Let's get one of those life rafts and we'll go someplace where we don't have this problem. Well, to make our analogy complete, we must understand that all the other ships at sea and all the major ports have been taken over by this same group of pirates. Maybe different branches, but they're all basically the same, and there is no place to go except maybe some flea-bitten island somewhere where you couldn't survive very long. And even then, they probably eventually locate you. Doesn't solve the problem. So let's forget that. Number 4, let's hide. Let's drop out of the system. Maybe they won't find us if we take the number off of our stateroom. If we don't have a number, they'll never know we're on board the ship. Right? Oh, I know there's a big place down in the boiler room. They got these big tanks, and there's some spaces back there, and you can hide for a long time. They'd never even know you're there. Everybody else goes to the prison island, but we're safe because we're invisible. And it doesn't work, because even if you were invisible for a little while, eventually they'd find you behind that big boiler tank. And you'd wind up there also. I think of some of my friends that say, well, you know, I've got rid of my Social Security card because they'll never find me without a number. And I get this mental picture of the blue helmets showing up at 3 o'clock in the morning, banging down the door with the butts of their rifles and saying, you and your family into the truck. And they say, well, you can't do that to me. I don't have a Social Security card. I don't mean to be too hard on my friends that don't like Social Security. I don't either, but that's not the point. You can't hide. You can't hide on that ship. And you can't hide on our ship either. They know where you are, and it won't make any difference if you're in or out of the system. So let's go to number 5. Now here's a practical one. Let's write letters of protest and send petitions to the pirates asking them to be nice. Let's have a letter writing campaign. A big petition program. If we get enough signatures on pieces of paper, those pirates are going to shake in their boots. Well, they don't care. That's not going to do it at all. So if that's not going to work, how about number 6? Let's take them to court. Let's get a very good lawyer, which means an expensive lawyer, and we'll prove in court that they can't do that to us. It's against the Constitution, it's against the laws, and the courts will defend us. Surely they will. But we must recognize that on board this ship, the courts are controlled by the pirates. So that won't work. What does that leave, ladies and gentlemen? That's 6 out of the 7. Well, here's number 7. This is all that's left. If we want to solve this problem, this is what we must do. We must organize a counter coup and recapture the ship. Now, that's enough to scare you to death. As I said before, these guys are tough. They're not going to like it if they see that we're trying to do that. But ladies and gentlemen, if we are serious about this, it's not just some kind of an armchair activity. We must recapture control of this ship, or there is nothing that we're ever going to do that's going to solve the problem. We must recapture control of the ship just the way it was captured from control of those who were its rightful owners in the first place. Now, how do you do that? How do you recapture a ship that's in the hands of a bunch of pirates, some very bad people, and people with great power? They've got all the guns. They've got the police force. They've got the courts. How are you going to do that? Well, we're going to do it the same way they did it. First of all, we must understand that cooperation is necessary. We can't do it one at a time. They didn't do it alone, one person or two people. They got organized in the first place. They got groups together. And they discovered, or they knew, not that they discovered it, everyone knows this, that people working together in cooperation are far more effective than the same number of people working separately. There's a squaring effect that takes place. I've seen it so many times in organizational work. Two people working separately, side by side, can accomplish the effect of two people. But if they join forces and work in concert, they can accomplish the same effect as four people separately. In other words, 2 times 2. 3 people working together can accomplish the effect of 9 working separately. 4, the effect of 16, and so forth. Just imagine the power that is available to a group even of 100 people who are organized and willing to work together. Or a group of 4,000 people, as we now have in the United States, in the CFR, who literally control and run the entire ship. But only 4,000 of them. And probably fewer than that at the inner core. The circle within the circle is far smaller than 4,000 people. But they do work together, and we also must do that. Secondly, we need international unity. That doesn't mean we have to surrender our allegiance and our love of national country, our love of country. Not at all. I don't think we're not talking about internationalism in that sense, but we are talking about international cooperation. People in other countries have the same problem. Our enemies are organized across national boundaries. We must seek the cooperation and support of people in all countries in the world. Our vision must be international in scope, while at the same time defending national sovereignty. 3, we need people who are activists, those who are willing to do more than just read about a problem or think about a problem or talk about a problem. People who are willing to devote a significant portion of their lives. Armchair patriots are useless in this struggle. 5, we need a training program to alert those who join with us, to alert them to the tactics that are used by our collectivist opponents. We've talked about a few of them earlier, but there are many more. And if we don't understand the tactics of using a two-party system, for example, the tactics of putting forth your own opposition, if we don't understand that and cannot recognize it, we can never defend ourselves against it. And we must have a training program to show how we can ethically counter those tactics. We need an organizational structure that cannot be subverted. You know, one of the things that these people are expert at is turning a movement around so that all of a sudden it's going in the opposite direction of where it started. I have seen foundations set up with a considerable amount of money left behind by some patriot who wanted this foundation to carry forth a goal on behalf of freedom principles and economic solvency and sound money. And it didn't take long before the board of directors was taken over by other people with a different view, and all of this man's wealth is now being used to promote exactly the opposite of what he left it for. This is a tactic we have to know about and defend ourselves against. We must have a structure that makes that impossible. Now, how do you do that? Most organizations are formed along the pyramidal structure. You've got the head of it, and then you've got the management, middle management, and then at the base of the pyramid you've got all the workers who are doing all the work and making the thing work. This type of an organization is common in industry, in corporations, in military, and so forth. But in our movement, it would be disastrous. Because all you'd have to do is knock off the head of the organization and it's dead. How do you knock off the head of an organization? Well, aside from the obvious that you're probably thinking, a bullet does pretty good, and poison and all kinds of arranged suicides and so forth, it's a proven and true method. But there are other methods that these people use, and the main one that let me tell you how the hierarchy goes. This is the hierarchy of choices on how they eliminate opposition. First, they ignore it. And that's usually all that's necessary, because those of us who are trying to oppose the collectivist international leadership do not have the media, do not have the funding, do not have the wherewithal, the support to have staying power. And so we may just flash in the pan and it may hit the news once, and then it's gone. It's gone. They don't have to do anything. Just wait for it to die out. If that doesn't work, then the next thing is to discredit the leadership, to demonize the leadership, which is pretty easy to do when you own the media. They can make anybody in this room look like an absolute demon. Whether it's based on fact, partial fact, or completely fabricated lies, it makes no difference. The public will believe it if they see it in the press and on the evening news. If that doesn't work, then they will attempt to buy off their opposition. And this is where money really becomes very powerful as a weapon. They might come to an organization and say, you know, we like what you're doing, we like your principles, we like everything that you're doing, but we think you need money. And of course, the leadership, if it's not too smart, say, well, yeah, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? And they said, well, we'll give you a substantial amount of money because we believe in what you're doing. But all we ask in return is that you allow us to nominate or put a member on your board of directors to make sure that our money is being well spent. So for $1 million or a $5 million grant, don't you think it'd be reasonable to let so-and-so be on your board of directors? Well, that sounds pretty reasonable, especially since Mr. So-and-so is a well-respected citizen, and you think that would be a good addition to your board. And through this process, $5 million, $10 million, whatever it takes, first thing you know, your board of directors is salted with collectivists, and you're through. And of course, if that fails, then there's an outright bribery offer of the, look, why don't you just retire? You've always wanted to go to the Bahamas. You and your family, we'll set you up there. We'll give you a job with some law firm down there that you don't have to do anything. Just collect your $20,000 a month, and we'll give you a hacienda and a chauffeur, and just go away. And some people will say, that sounds pretty good. And if that doesn't work, well, then they play rough. The point of all this is that if you have a pyramidal organization where one man or just a couple of people at the top are everything in that organization, it's a very bad and precarious situation to be living under. Instead of that, we need to turn this not around so that it's top-heavy, but to go to an entirely different structure, which is the holographic structure. Now, the hologram is a very interesting thing. I don't think many people really understand it from a scientific point of view, but we all know that if you take a holographic plate and it's got all these circles inscribed in it, and you pass light through it, not a polarized light, but a certain kind of light through it, it looks as though there's an image that appears in three-dimensional space. It's a miracle. But the bigger miracle is that if you take a pair of scissors and you cut that holographic plate in half, move them apart, lo and behold, you've got the same image on both halves, the complete image. And if you cut those in half, you've got now 4 images, the complete 4 images. And if you cut those in half and those in half, no matter how small you go, you have the complete image in every little piece. Now, they're smaller, and the detail is less, but the complete image is there. What we need is a holographic organization so that every component, every person in the organization has the complete information and knowledge to make that organization completely successful and to spring forth anywhere in the world. So that if, for some reason, every single person in the organization was eliminated or lost heart or became frightened or whatever, they were out of it. As long as there's one person left somewhere, he would have all of the information and all of the ability to cause that to spring up again and to literally cover the world, kind of like a little freedom virus. You know? That's the holographic plan, and that's what we need. And finally, we need a clear statement of principles. Principles. It's not enough, remember, to vote for some guy because he's got a nice smile or because you think he's sincere. Or, more to the point, you vote for A because you hate B. That's how most people vote. They don't like A at all, but they really hate B. So they vote for A, the lesser of two evils. That's not how to solve this problem. And we cannot base an organization on anything less than principles. Our people must understand the principles of a free society. We must know what we are for as well as what we are against. Now, before looking at solutions, we need to ask why no one has found a solution before. We've been at this game for quite a while. I've been aware of these problems since the early 1960s. And some people have been watching it and fighting it for much longer than that. Some very smart people, some very wealthy people, well-educated people, well-connected people, organizations, a lot of motion in that direction. And no one has solved this problem before. Why have we been losing our freedom in spite of that? I think the answer was given to us in the year 500 BC by a rather famous philosopher, Chinese philosopher and warrior by the name of Sun Tzu. He wrote this little booklet called The Art of Warfare. And that, by the way, is used, I believe, in every war college in the world. They study the philosophies and the strategies of Sun Tzu. And one of the things that Sun Tzu said is this. He said, if a man knows himself and his opponent, he need not fear 100 battles. If he knows himself but not his opponent, then for every victory he will suffer a defeat. And if he knows neither himself nor his opponent, then he will suffer defeat in every battle. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have been suffering defeat in virtually every battle. And I think that suggests that we do not know ourselves, and we certainly do not know our opponent. So let's take a few moments and ask what we know about our opponent and then what we know about ourselves, and then we'll finally get to the strategy. There are 4 things we know about our opponent that are crucial facts. One is that modern totalitarian systems are all variants of collectivism. Well, that's not quite true. In the Western world, they are. In the Middle East, of course, they're based on theocracies. There's still theocracy out there. We find it hard to believe, but it involves a major portion of the world. But in the United States and in the Western countries of the world, the totalitarian systems are not theocracies. They are based on the ideology of collectivism. Now, we must understand, although that's not our topic here today, that's one of those previous parts that we have to skip over. We must understand that communism, fascism, Nazism, socialism, all of those isms that we've been taught are so bad are mere variants of a common denominator ideology called collectivism. That's what they all are. Their differences are minuscule. Their commonalities are great. They're all based on the principle of big government, that the end justifies the means, that the group is more important than the individual, and so forth. So all of these systems out there are basically collectivism. And even today now, we're watching our own country being moved closer and closer into a totalitarian system because we have adopted collectivism in our political system. Now, we don't call it Nazism or communism or fascism, but in a very real degree, there's no longer much difference between the system we live under and the systems we have been taught to reject. The second thing we need to know about our opponent is that there are 2 main branches of them. I mentioned that to you earlier. We have the Leninists on the one side, who we used to think of the old-time communists, you know. Well, they merely took off their hat that said communism and they put a new hat on that said Democrat, Socialist, or something like that, you know. They have a different name, but they're the same heads under the hats, did you know? The heads didn't change. Basically, the philosophies have not changed. So we have this whole big section of the world who may call themselves social democrats or something like that, but they are still Leninists. And if you read their works very carefully, you may find a Gorbachev or somebody like that saying, oh yes, Stalin was bad, so So good that we got rid of Stalinism, whatever that is. But he would say, don't forget, we'll never abandon the principles of Leninism. And to the average person, that doesn't mean anything. They don't. What is Leninism? I'll talk about that in just a moment. We have these two branches. The other branch, of course, I have in the past called the Fabians, because of the Fabian Society. Perhaps a better name would be to call them the Rhodesians, because they're the followers and the disciples of Cecil Rhodes. Anyway, it's that other camp, the ones that choose not to have a name, so that we have to struggle to find a name to describe them. That's the brilliance of their strategy. We are in the grips of a worldwide struggle between two camps of collectivism, and we are being asked to choose up sides. That's part of the trick. We're not going to find freedom in either side. And the sooner we wake up to that fact, the better off we'll be. The third thing we must understand is that collectivists are not content with persuasion. Their method is coercion. If something is worth doing, it's worth forcing people to do. That's one of the tenets of collectivism. Not freedom of choice, but we will force people to do what they should do. That's the philosophy. If we're going to talk about protecting people in time of crash, automobile crash, we can say, well, they ought to have seatbelts. Collectivist says, yes, seatbelts, good idea. Let's pass a law and force everyone to have seatbelts on. Or if not, we'll put them in prison. An individualist, which is the other camp, would say, well, I think seatbelts are a good idea too, but I don't think it's coercing everybody to wear a seatbelt. Let's educate them, let's convince them, let's show them by good example or whatever, but we're not going to put people in jail for not wearing seatbelts, and that's the division, you see. The collectivist believes in coercion, and the ultimate weapon of coercion is the law. And that is why collectivists always gravitate into government, because government is the instrument by which they can bring about their schemes and plans of how to improve society, because they're going to force people to do it through government. That is why almost always you find governments populated by collectivists, because the people, such as ourselves perhaps, who don't believe in coercion, we don't want to go to government. We want to be out in the private sector. So we get this lopsided situation where all of the people with power are collectivists. And we have to do something to change that. Back in the 60s, I became interested in all of these collectivist totalitarian systems. And I bought a copy of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf and read it. And gee, that's pretty scary. But I saw how he was using collectivism to manipulate the masses for a fascist system. And then I started to read the works of the communists. You know, Lenin and Stalin and the others. And for a while I would go down to the communist bookstore in Los Angeles, down on Larchmont Street. It was called the People's Bookshop. And I was hanging out with the comrades down there. They didn't really know why I was there. They thought I was potentially a recruit, you know. And they invited me to some of their discussion groups. And I went. I wanted to learn. And I found out what they talk about and how they think. And I bought their books and I read them. And I got it. And one of the things that I got during that period of my enlightenment was the difference between a Marxist and what they call a Marxist-Leninist. Now, that may sound like nothing, you know, words, what's Marxist-Leninist business? Well, pretty important distinction. A Marxist is a person who's read the writings of Karl Marx, you know, Das Kapital or the Communist Manifesto, and he believes that in his heart. He knows it's true. Workers of the world, unite. Throw off your chains of the capitalist exploiters. Rise against racism and war. You know, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. So on and so forth. All the slogans of Marxism, which sound so good to the idealistic mind. And then this other phrase, that's the Marxists. Now, who are these Marxist-Leninists? Well, they too have read the works of Karl Marx, and they believe all of that. But they have read the works of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, and they believe that. Therein lies the difference. Lenin said this. He said, comrades, it makes no difference what you think or what you know, how many books you've read, how smart you are, how good you are in debate, makes no difference. None of that. The only thing that matters is that you must come to power. Do whatever is necessary to come to power. Forget the debates. Lie, cheat, steal, kill, whatever. Come to power. Then, after you have the power, you can afford the luxury of debate. Because anyone who disagrees with you, you can shoot them. That's Lenin. He taught that. He said, promises are like pie crusts made to be broken. He's a real quotable guy. And he had it figured. He said, look, comrades, if you go into a country and they have strong nationalist traditions and they have an affinity to their heritage and their culture, what do? You go in there and say, no, you people are stupid. What we need is international communism? No, he said, they would reject you. You go in there and tell them what they want to hear, he said. You be the nationalist. You be the biggest defender of their culture and their traditions, of them all, so that they will follow you. They will put you into positions of power. Now, once you come to power, then you can betray them because you have the power. But that's how you do it, he said. He said, comrades, if you go into a country where they don't like communists, what do? Say, I'm a communist? No. He said, we got a few people we put out for that purpose. While everybody's looking over there at those people who are waving the hammer and sickle, he said, our real people are moving into the power centers of society saying, I'm not a communist. In fact, I'm an anti-communist. Lenin said, you be the leaders of the anti-communist movement so that people will follow you to their own destruction. This is Lenin. That is Leninism. So when you hear somebody say that they are a Marxist-Leninist, now you know what they are talking about. They're not just an idealistic socialist. These people have a plan for coming to power. All the nations of the world that have been taken over by what we used to call communism, none of them have been taken by Marxists. They were all taken by Marxist-Leninists. Now that's important to know. This is what we are up against. Now this philosophy, ladies and gentlemen, even though it is so well pronounced by Lenin, is followed by the people in all collectivist camps. It's followed by the Fabians, it's followed by the Rhodesians, if we want to call them that. They understand this. In fact, there are people who just homegrown politicians in your local town that follow this strategy without even ever knowing that Lenin wrote about it. If you sat down and you just figured, how are we going to fool people and come to power, you'd probably come up with this strategy yourself. It's not that brilliant. But we must understand that it is taught and it is followed by the people who have come to power today. The other thing we must understand, the fourth thing, is that all collectivists share a common strategy for coming to power. And I mentioned that earlier, which is they capture control of the power centers of society. Those groups and organizations for which people work and belong, voluntary associations in most cases, and they have leaders. And so the collectivists in both of these camps always try to place their people into the leadership positions of those organizations so that a very few can dominate and lead the many. That is the strategy for their conquest. I'd like to quote to you a statement made by a rather obscure fellow by the name of Joseph Cornfetter. Cornfetter, I'm sure most people have never heard of this name, but he was a charter member of the Communist Party USA. He joined in 1919. Now, he went to Moscow, and he trained there, and he broke away. And he finally decided that this is not what he wanted for his people. He saw through the charade. He saw through the lies and the deceit, and he broke away. A lot of communists did in those days. They were idealists, you know, and then they just dropped out and wanted to forget it. Cornfetter was different. He decided he wanted to tell the American people what was really going on. And he broke away from the party, and he started to speak against what he had been doing himself. And in a speech in 1955 in San Francisco, this is what he said. The true characteristics of the Communist Party, and remember, we're talking not just about the Communist Party here. This happened to be his area of expertise. The true characteristics are to be found not so much in its theories as in its methods of organization. Keep in mind, they are applying a new concept of warfare, the concept of conquering a country from within. How do you conquer a country from within? You conquer it by capturing the organizations that operate inside that country. A labor union, a farm organization or newspaper guild, a teachers association, a political club, a government agency, etc., are considered as power centers. The sum total of these organizations is the sum total of power. The party organizes inside of these organizations, group by group. To fight them effectively, one has to do the same thing in reverse. Mere resolution passing cannot cope with that sort of an enemy. End quote. And boy, is he right. We think that if we can just pass a resolution or send a letter to our congressman or something like that, it's going to solve the whole problem. While these people have a strategy of this magnitude, and they've taken over the power centers of society and represent our leadership. So let's review the strengths of our opponent. He's got a plan. He's got an ideology. He knows what he wants. He's organized. He's got discipline. He's got funding, got training. He's got communications. And he's been at it for a long, long time. His goal is world conquest. And he's on the road marching. That's what we know about our opponent. Now, we ask, what do we know about ourselves? And this is where it gets really depressing. What do we know about ourselves? Well, in general, I'm not talking about you folks or anybody here, although you never know. It happens. But in general, the American people are all wrapped up with economic issues. Survival, getting ahead, putting money away. Just, they work like dogs, two breadwinners now, having to keep the roof over their head, make the payments to the bank. You know, how are you going to survive? Send your kids to school and buy the things that they should have. We need a new couch. We need new drapes. We need a new car. Can I get a promotion? Maybe a different job? We're all wrapped up in economic affairs. We're economic animals in this country. That preoccupies 80 to 90% of our consciousness. If it's not that, we have this endless routine of work and play. Well, if we're not working, how are we going to play? Well, have a golf game, or go watch some sporting events, or go on vacation. We have to entertain ourselves. We dislike organizational work. I mean, who wants to get involved in an organization? I mean, you know how those things work. They got all that backbiting and the people struggling for power and everything, and they're always fighting over some little issue. I don't want any part of that. And politics? Ha! Are you kidding? I hate politicians. I wouldn't dirty my hands with politics. Right? We all know that's bad. So we leave it to the enemy. There's no opposition from us. We don't want any part of it. We want freedom. Yeah, we want freedom. But we don't know how to get it. We don't know quite what it means. We have no creed. We can't define it. How many people can stand up and say, I believe that the essence of freedom is this, 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 and this? Anybody want to debate? Most people think that freedom is not being in jail. That's the end of it. They have no creed. They have no vision of victory. They don't even know they're in a battle in most cases. And if they had a vision of victory, they wouldn't know how to build a better world, what steps to take, this one, and then after that another step. Our opponents have all of those things. We have none of those things. And so the answer to the question is that we have been losing this battle not because we are inferior or because our enemy is superior. It's just that we have never engaged him in battle. We've never even shown up on the battlefield. And for the most part have no intention of doing so. So how do we engage him in battle? Now let's get back to this issue. What are we going to do on this ship of state? How do we engage those pirates in battle? And the answer is very clear. Cornfetter gave us the answer. Little unknown guy, Joseph Cornfetter, gave us the answer. We're going to take back the power centers one by one, exactly as we lost them in the first place. Now, this was an epiphany for me that came late in my career. As I mentioned earlier, I had been in the trenches, more or less, trying to defend these principles of freedom ever since the early 1960s. And I remember so clearly saying to groups of people, well, power is dangerous. Power is the problem. These people have all this power over our lives. The problem is power, I said. We must reject power. No, we must not have power ourselves. We must fight to eliminate power. And then I woke up one morning and I realized, wow, we lose just like that. There has never been a tyranny of history that was ever overthrown unless by equal or superior power than itself. Never. And as long as we reject power as a means to our end, we are saying we cannot and will not win. That was hard for me to face because it was a complete turnaround in my thinking up until that point. And yet I realized that this is why we have been losing, is because we have never been willing to reach for power. That was the missing piece in the puzzle. Lenin was wrong on ideology and morality, but he was right on the three great lessons of power. And those are, 1, it makes no difference what you think if others hold the power. 2, power does not seek those who are virtuous. Just because we're good guys doesn't mean we're going to win. Power does not seek those who are virtuous. It belongs to those who reach for it. And 3, once power is acquired, it must be used to defend itself against those who would take it from us. I don't like those principles. I wish they weren't true, but they are. In fact, that third one is why we lost control of our country. We did not defend the power that once the American people had over their own system. We lost it because we were not, first of all, aware that there was an enemy trying to take it from us. And secondly, even those who were aware of it, such as myself, in the early days, we rejected power ourselves. Senator Fulbright was wrong on ideology, but he was right in understanding that those who hold power will always educate the people and determine the course that the ship will take. It's just a question of who will hold the power. When our nation was founded, it was founded by a group of elites. They held the power. They were the ones who were already in the legislatures of our colonial governments. They had the power. Our American Revolution was not fought by a bunch of farmers with guns who loosely organized and said, hey, the British are coming. Yes, they were there, but they were there because they had leaders who had the power of their local governments. Without that, the American Revolution could never have succeeded. If you understand these lessons, ladies and gentlemen, then and only then are you ready to change the course of history. So now we turn at last to Freedom Force. Freedom Force is not an academic program or a study club or a letter writing committee, but it is a network of ideological warriors, and I use that word very carefully, whose goal is nothing less than to come to power. And that is why the slogan, or the motto, I should say, the motto of Freedom Force in Latin is Impotentes, defendere, libertatem non possunt. Now that's Latin for those without power cannot defend freedom. Let me repeat that, please. This is the whole point of my presentation here today. Those without power cannot defend freedom. Now, we all remember that Lord Acton warned us, did he not? That power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. A lot of people remember that phrase. It sort of rolls from the tongue. And it's true. There's nothing more corrupting than power. And yet here I am standing before you and saying, we must reach for power. Wow, how dangerous is that? The answer is, it's dangerous. Having guns is dangerous. People get killed with guns. The only thing more dangerous is not having them. Political power is dangerous. It can get out of hand. It can corrupt people. The only thing more dangerous is not having it. Yes, it's dangerous. And any course of action that blunders into this without recognizing that danger and without taking specific steps to make sure that those of us who are involved are not or cannot be corrupted by the power we seek, making a big mistake. So our movement must incorporate ideas and concepts and mechanisms to make sure that those of us, not if, but when we succeed somewhere in the future and have recaptured control of the power centers of society, we must have mechanisms in place so that power cannot corrupt us ourselves, because we are corruptible. How do we do that? Well, I think the United States Constitution was a good step in the right direction, but it wasn't perfect. We can see it wasn't perfect, or we wouldn't have lost the principles that it embodied. There were flaws in it. I think the guys that put that Constitution together were brilliant. I don't think you've ever seen such a group of great minds and intellectuals in history. But just because that's true doesn't mean that the document they created was absolutely perfect in every sense. I can see that one flaw in the Constitution, in my opinion, was that it was an administrative document instead of a teaching document. It's possible to read the Constitution without understanding the ideological principles embodied in it. In order to understand why they put those provisions in there, you've got to go elsewhere. You've got to go to the Federalist Papers and to the private letters written by the Founding Fathers, the debates that took place while the Constitution was being hammered together. That is where you find the arguments in defense of individualism, in defense of liberty. But you don't find it in the Constitution itself. It's all mechanisms. And so even if we required the school kids to read the Constitution, which we don't, unfortunately, but even if we did, they wouldn't know what they were reading for the most part. There's nothing that gets you in the heart or in the brain. But if the rationale for all of those provisions had been written into the Constitution perhaps as annotations over on the left side, that we're doing this because of this, I think it might have had a good chance at surviving. That's just one thing. But the most brilliant thing about the Constitution is that it is a negative document. It does not grant powers. At least the Bill of Rights doesn't. The Bill of Rights doesn't grant any powers. It limits the powers. It doesn't say that Congress shall do this, this, and this. It says Congress shall not do this, this, and this. It's those limitation of powers that makes this concept so viable. I think it was Jefferson who got a letter from a friend of his shortly after the Constitution was put together. And the letter said, it was Jefferson. He said, Mr. Jefferson, now that we have our new Constitution, how can we be sure that only good men are elected to office? And Jefferson's response was quite brilliant. He was irate almost. He said, speak to me not of good men. Rather, let us bind men down with the chains of the Constitution. He was saying, in essence, of course we're going to have scoundrels running for office, and of course they're going to be elected. Any system that depends only on good men and angels being elected to office is a dumb system. It's not going to work. Our founding fathers knew that. And so they designed a system which was supposed to prevent the chains of the Constitution, were supposed to chain them down and prevent them from abusing the power that they were given. And it, as I said before, it did a pretty good job, but it didn't do a good enough job. Over the passage of time, those chains were broken, one by a combination of Supreme Court rulings, by people who didn't like those chains, and reinforced by ignorance and apathy of the American public who didn't understand that there were chains there in the first place. So we have a model at least. We have to establish certain principles when we set our own program in motion, and they will be negative principles. We must have a creed of freedom, a set of rules, a set of chains that will bind not only our politicians in the future, but those of us who are in freedom force as well. And that led me ultimately to the necessity to create something called the Creed of Freedom. Now, the Creed of Freedom is the ideological compass that guides all of our members. It's not like a political platform. It's not a series of issues like we should be opposed to illegal immigration, or we should be for Social Security, or a bunch of issues. No. These are principles. These are principles that are eternal. And if we understand those principles, then we can use them as a template to evaluate all of the issues that come either today, tomorrow, or 100 years from now. They either pass the principles or they're defeated by the principles. So the idea is to focus on principles, not issues, and certainly not on personalities. Now, I can't claim real credit for this. Everything I'm going to read to you, you'll recognize many of these thoughts come from the great thinkers of the past. My role primarily has been to read the literature, to try and figure out what it means, to get it organized, to condense it down, to get it all in one piece of paper. It was really pretty easy. It only took me 42 years to do it. Well, I didn't work on it constantly, but it took a long time. So here it is, the Creed of Freedom. I believe that only individuals have rights, not the collective group. That these rights are intrinsic to each individual, not granted by the state. For if the state has the power to grant them, it also has the power to deny them, and that is incompatible with personal liberty. I believe that a just government derives its power solely from the governed. Therefore, the state must never presume to do anything beyond what individual citizens also have the right to do. Otherwise, the state is a power unto itself and becomes the master instead of the servant of society. I believe that one of the greatest threats to freedom is to allow any group, no matter its numeric superiority, to deny the rights of the minority, and that one of the primary functions of just government is to protect each individual from the greed and passion of the majority. I believe that desirable social and economic objectives are better achieved by voluntary action than by coercion of law. I believe that social tranquility and brotherhood are better achieved by tolerance, persuasion, and the power of good example than by coercion of law. I believe that those in need are better served by charity, which is the giving of one's own money, than by welfare, which is the giving of other people's money through coercion of law. I believe that all citizens should be equal under law, regardless of their national origin, race, religion, gender, education, economic status, lifestyle, or political opinion. Likewise, no class should be given preferential treatment regardless of the merit or popularity of its cause. To favor one class over another is not equality under law. I believe that the proper role of government is negative, not positive, defensive, not aggressive. It is to protect, not to provide. For if the state is granted the power to provide for some, it must also be able to take from others. And once that power is granted, there are those who will seek it for their advantage. It always leads to legalized plunder and loss of freedom. If government is powerful enough to give us everything we want, it is also powerful enough to take from us everything we have. Therefore, the proper function of government is to protect the lives, liberty, and property of its citizens, nothing more. That government is best which governs least. And that is the creed of freedom for us. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Now, let's open this up to questions. Yes.
Could you tell us what you think the timetable is for world domination and what the picture would be for each individual when that happens?
The question is, what is my opinion about the timetable for world domination and what that would mean for us when it happens? My answer may surprise you. It's already happened. It's not something that's going to happen. It happened. It happened a long time ago. It's just that they're gradually raising the height of the walls. That's all. Gradually, day by day, there are more restrictions and more rules and regulations. And there'll be no time when they suddenly ring the bell and say, okay, the New World Order started today. It started a long time ago. And what it means for our future is that we will live in abject collectivism. Not an awful lot different from the people in Soviet Russia did back in the 60s and 70s. Except we may have a little higher standard of living because of the flywheel effect of our economic system. But even that, I think, will probably run down because under a collectivist system, the incentive to keep production up and services high is gone. And so both production and services would deteriorate, and I think we'd wind up very much like a third world country, which is what they want. They want all of the world to be pretty much the same. Yes, sir.
Where does God figure into all of this? Because in our Constitution as it was written and set up before, was based on the fact that people governed themselves individually because of the Ten Commandments, because of their belief in God. And now our country is trying to kick God out of everything. So we see all this disaster happening. We see things like the Katrina, the hurricanes, and all of that that's bringing destruction. So in your plan, how does the God factor enter into this?
Well, that's a big question, and I can think of about 7 different ways to approach it, but let me start with the one that's on my mind right now. It's difficult to speak about a divinity without getting into theological dissertations, which I'm particularly incapable of doing very well, and certainly not qualified. So my comments would have to be directed more at the economic and the political side, and leave the theological issues to those who are better qualified to discuss it. But I will say this on the theological side, that the collectivists are eternal enemies of all religion because they recognize that if people have a religious faith, They have a loyalty to something other than the state. And collectivists do not like that. The state must be all. The state must be religion. People must literally worship the state as their salvation. And some of the earlier writers on this topic have even said so in plain English, that collectivism must become the new religion of man. And they're very clear on that. And of course, we see the collectivists are opposed to any loyalty that would divide the people from affinity to the state. Any loyalty, such as to family. If you have people who turn to the family for support rather than to the state does not like that, because now you're independent of the state. So this is why I believe that the collectivists have this eternal hostility to all religions, because it pulls the loyalties of men away from the state. Yes, sir.
I was curious, you're putting out there's a movie coming out in America, Freedom of Fascism.
Yes.
And it seems to me that even while we're doing this Federal Reserve thing is still something that has to be eliminated in the same process, is it not?
It is.
We still function with the Federal Reserve. I don't see how.
No. Yeah, the question basically is how does the Federal Reserve fit into our plan for recovery? And of course, it's a complete roadblock. As long as the Federal Reserve System exists, it puts the complete power of the economy into the hands of those with the power, the collectivists who have captured that power center of society. And so the question is, how do you get rid of the Federal Reserve System? Well, you don't get rid of the Federal Reserve System by petitioning the congressmen who voted it in. They're dedicated to it. They're committed to it. They depend upon it. They're afraid of the people who run it. They owe their political careers to the people that run it. You can send letters to your blue in the face and petitions to these congressmen, and they're not going to get rid of the Federal Reserve. So what do? You've got to replace the congressman. See, that's where we have to get back to basics and start recapturing control of the power centers of society. Yes, sir.
Gentleman back there addressed the issue of possibly a third axis counter freedom. And I appreciate that you mentioned the two axes, the pagan and the Marxist. Mm-hmm. But it does seem to me that this theocratic axis of Islam is very much against freedom as we know it, and it's certainly a force that has to be reckoned with, so it doesn't fall into the collective mold as it is.
Yes.
And I wonder how you thought about that.
Yes, thank you for that. The gentleman asked me to comment on the third major element in the world today of totalitarianism, which is theocracy. And you notice in my presentation, I believe I said this applies to the Western world. The Western world is infected with collectivism, but much of the rest of the world has theocracy to contend with. And the end result for the people living under those systems is pretty much the same. It does not include freedom. And there are different ways of justifying the restriction of human effort and human activities. In the collectivist systems, they say that you must be obedient to the state because the state represents the greater good of society, the greater good of the greater number. But in the theocratic systems, they say you must be obedient to the state because the state represents the will of God. Either way, you must be subservient to the will of the state, and the state's will is always determined by those who hold the power of the state. So it again boils down that the many serve the few. It's just the excuse for doing so is different. Yes, sir.
The golden rule, maybe you agree with this or not, he who has the gold makes the rules. What do you see happening to gold prices over the next couple of years, gold and silver, and do you think that a gold-backed currency or buying gold, that's what your book kind of changed my worldview, and I've gone on and read a lot of Austrian school economic theory, and I'm actually now, I was a commodity broker now, and I've spoken about this, now I'm in the gold and silver business. We buy actual bullion for customers. I was wondering what you think is going to happen. Do you also think that at some point it will be illegal to own gold again? if people start, which they are, now you've got China, for the first time the Chinese are able to buy gold. India is buying gold like crazy. In the U.S., it's, people are starting to buy gold again because our dollar's becoming worth less and less. What do you see happening?
Well, the question is that we have a commodity broker here asking me what's going to happen in the commodities market. What do I think? Yeah. Well, it's obvious I don't know, but I think that there's only one place for gold and silver to go, and that's up. The people who have sat on this market of gold and silver by selling not options, but leases for the gold and silver, have suppressed the price for a long, long time, I think far below its natural price. I don't think that can go on forever, but I'm surprised to see it's gone on as long as it has. Sooner or later, I think that's got to break loose. In fact, it already has broken loose, hasn't it? We've seen it rise considerably in the last few months, but I think it's going to go even higher. The other question is even more interesting, and that is, are they going to make it illegal to own gold and silver? I think they will try. Why wouldn't they? If you were them, wouldn't you? Yeah, you would try. So it just depends on whether or not there's enough public opposition to it that they can't get away with it. So I think they will try. So the answer is, remember, there is no solution except to recapture the ship. If you think you're going to put it all into gold and silver and ride out the storm, that's not going to do it. You've got to recapture the ship. Now, getting back to the strategy, recapturing the ship. Don't be discouraged by small numbers. We do not need 51% of the population. We do not need 51% on board this ship, or even 51% of the voters. The majority never decides anything. We know that. Those who decide are the ones who lead the majority. That's the point of all of this. They do this by selecting the candidates, shaping the issues, and controlling the flow of information. They are the ones who hold the power. They comprise less than 1% of the population. All we need to do is look at the Council on Foreign Relations as an example. That, ladies and gentlemen, is our role model. That is how it is done, and that is how we are going to do it. Collectivism and freedom are mortal enemies. Only one will survive. Every one of us here today will be forced by events to make a decision. Doing nothing is a decision in itself. It's a decision by default. It is a decision that will put us into servitude. If you choose to stand for liberty, ladies and gentlemen, then freedom force awaits you. I'm going to close by telling you that the future is calling. It really is. Can you hear it like I do? I hear it every morning when I wake. I hear it all day long, and usually the last thing before I sleep. I hear the voices of my grandchildren and their grandchildren, and they call me by name. Papa, Papa, what are you doing? What's happening to our freedom? What are you doing for us? And in my mind's ear, I hear myself reply, hold on, hold on. I'm doing everything I can. Doesn't anyone else hear these voices? I wonder if the world is so deafened by the sound of cash registers and rock music and sporting events and sitcom laugh tracks that they cannot hear. Well, I have heard, and I have given my answer for all to hear. And now you would please me so much if you would add your voices to mine, so that together we can answer the future back and say, hold on, we are doing everything we can, and we will not let you down. Thank you.
G. Edward Griffin is a writer and documentary film producer with many successful titles to his credit. Listed in Who's Who in America, he is well known because of his talent for researching difficult topics and presenting them in clear terms that all can understand. He has dealt with such diverse subjects as archaeology and ancient Earth history, the Federal Reserve System and international banking, terrorism, internal subversion, the history of taxation, U.S. foreign policy, the science and politics of cancer therapy, the Supreme Court, and the United Nations. His better-known works include The Creature from Jekyll Island, World Without Cancer, The Discovery of Noah's Ark, Moles in High Places, The Open Gates of Troy, No Place to Hide, The Capitalist Conspiracy, More Deadly Than War, The Grand Design, The Great Prison Break, and The Fearful Master. Mr. Griffin is a graduate of the University of Michigan, where he majored in speech and communications. He is a recipient of the coveted Telly Award for Excellence in Television Production, the creator of the Reality Zone Audio Archives, and is president of American Media, a publishing and video production company in Southern California. He has served on the board of directors of the National Health Federation and the International Association of Cancer Victims and Friends, and is founder and president of the Cancer Cure Foundation. He is the founder of the Coalition for Visible Ballots, a grassroots organization for the elimination of vote fraud that is made possible by electronic voting systems. He is founder and president of Freedom Force International.